Okay, I think we're kind of have people still filing in, but we'll go ahead and get started. Oh, hello and welcome to Office Hours, the session where you can get your questions answered. I'm Chris Austin, the publisher of Maven's Notebook, and I'll be your host today. Our guest today is Paul Gosselin, DWR's Deputy Director for Sustainable Groundwater Management. There are a lot of you attending today, so I'll keep it brief. I published the website Maven's Notebook, California's Water News Central, so if by chance you are unfamiliar with it, visit mavensnotebook.com and check it out. I'm flying solo today. Well, actually, Grace Person from CivicWell is joining me, but we're going to be working with the Q&A today, so please enter your questions in the Q&A. You will also have the option to upvote questions that you're interested in hearing answered, and I will work in the order of the most upvoted questions first. I also have a few questions that were submitted to me via email, so I'm going to try to get to as many of your questions as I can in the next hour. I'm not really going to be able to monitor the chat, so please put your questions in the Q&A. And I will be sending a follow-up email to everyone who registered that will include a link to a recording of this session and additional resources. So let's get started. Paul Gosselin was appointed Deputy Director for Sustainable Groundwater Management in July of 2021. Paul oversees the Sustainable Groundwater Management Office, which includes statewide groundwater management activities and implementation of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, or SGMA. So while everyone starts putting their questions in, I want to just start with pointing out the incredible job that the GSAs have done working to comply with SGMA. I'm sure today we're going to be talking a lot about the problems and issues, but I don't want to ignore the fact that every groundwater basin formed a GSA and every groundwater basin submitted a GSP on time with one minor exception. So Paul, let's start with that and then tell us what's ahead for SGMA implementation at the department.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chris. Thank you all for being here today. It's really exciting times, and I think that was a real important point about the actions taken by local agencies to form, to get plans in on time, responding to if they were deemed incomplete, whether they made it through or not. So it really shows statewide the commitment to making this work. It's been 10 years since SGMA was enacted in 2014. Seems like a long time ago, but still the actual implementation is still in the early days. I mean, critically overdrafted basins have been implementing their plan for 4 years, and the non-critically overdrafted for the last 2. So there's real important, great work going on now, but there's a lot more ahead. But I do want to highlight some of the status where we're at right now and what's on the horizon. And again, I was going to recognize and really give credit to local agencies and all the other partners we've had implementing SGMA, including other state agencies, the NGOs, different associations, academia, and really just the public who've weighed in and given comments on plans and participated, because that's at the heart, one of the most important things that is part of this is the public involvement. So real quickly on status, and I'll talk just about really the initial reviews we had for plans. And we did complete the assessment reviews of the plans that was submitted in by January of 2022, and that includes the COD basins. So we have 71 approved basins. 13 basins are deemed incomplete, and they're on a 6-month clock to respond to the deficiencies. And we have 6 basins who went through the incomplete process and still had 1 or more deficiencies, and they were deemed inadequate, and now they're under jurisdiction of the State Water Resources Control Board. But I think with that, I do want to describe what approved means when basins get approved. And I've been kind of saying it's conditionally approved. It's the initial review. We did have a focus on how their sustainable management criteria was aligned with the Act. And this was probably one of the most difficult concepts for water managers, and I think anyone involved in the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. It's more than just eliminating the overdraft. It's looking at where you're going to manage the basin and how it affects every groundwater user and uses, including groundwater dependent ecosystems. And really at that lens, we're setting minimum thresholds. That's the beginning of when undesirable results are occurring. So that concept is, a difficult one. It's a new one. So, really, I think when we're reviewed plans, not just pointing out deficiencies, but also fed back to us in our assistance programs and things we may need to do to help local agencies. So for drinking water, lowering of groundwater levels, it really became apparent that we needed to come up with guidance on that. And we did that earlier in 2023. And I think it's been enormously helpful to let agencies know how to address drinking water, under SGMA in a way that complies with the law. And we've seen great movement on that. Similarly, we've found subsidence still needs a lot of work. And that's one thing that Sustainable Groundwater Management Act calls for, is to minimize or eliminate subsidence. And the other indicators do not have that level of expectation. And that's something because of the nature of subsidence and the need to address the impacts now, knowing that you're going to have residual subsidence, it becomes very paramount and timely to address that. So we're going to be coming out with a best management practice later this year on subsidence. And then lastly, one of the more controversial indicators, not controversial, I mean complex, is interconnected surface water depletion. And that was something when the act was going through, everyone recognized that was an issue that water managers needed to address. The problem is unlike other indicators, there isn't a ready off the shelf methodology for agencies to monitor and manage. And this is a regulatory program, and we don't want agencies to turn this into a research program. And so the legislature did, when they did that, this one indicator for interconnected surface water, the state board could not intervene on this indicator alone till 2025. It was recognized that needed to be some development of guidance and standards. So when we looked at plans, we wanted to make sure, knowing that they were all going to need some updating, we wanted to make sure a couple baseline things were in place. One is, did they do a reasonable job identifying the reaches that were interconnected? And two, did they do a reasonable job identifying groundwater dependent ecosystems and other species that were affected by depletions, and have some reasonable monitoring and SMC developed, knowing it's going to be probably changed after our guidance came out. So if they did that, it was basically a corrective action, and we pointed them to look at our guidance that is going to come out. And we're going to start developing issuing the guidance shortly, and it's going to come out in a series of topic papers over the next year to build up to a full-blown guidance document. So we're real excited about that, and a lot of work ahead. And again, now that we've completed the initial review, we're shifting our compliance oversight to what we're calling basin stewardship. And that's still going to involve less just looking at the written word, but a lot more engagement as to how implementation's going and what empirically is happening to basin conditions that are moving towards sustainability. So we will be looking at annual reports and evaluating annual reports for completeness. And then the periodic evaluation, will come up. Some people have been terming it as the 5-year update, but we'll be looking at that. Really, that's going to be a major step to evaluate whether they're on track or not, and whether they're addressing corrective actions. And so throughout all of this, a basin, even the ones that are approved, if we find that they're not on track for sustainability or they're somewhat getting out of compliance, You know, they can go back to the incomplete status or even the inadequate determination at any time. So there's going to be a lot more work ahead. And again, you know, I just want to touch on the assistance that we're looking to help improve basin implementation. We were lucky and fortunate to have roughly $400 million be issued the last 3 years to basins. As you know, state funding has gotten pretty tight, so that's the last of the grants we have, but we do have other assistance available. And that's still the technical support services, well installation. We do have facilitation services. We've expanded our written translation to verbal translations for agency, for meetings, you know, as well as some of the data and tools we have. So we're calling basin characterization project we're initiating now, and this is going to build upon the AEM work and the other data we have to help agencies get better characterization of their basin in a way that's consistent and using the tools we have. So this could alleviate some of the data gaps some basins have by the support we have. So we're going to try to navigate as difficult as budget times are to see what we can bring to the table to agencies to help them along their journey. But what's coming up, and again, I think as plans develop, we are going to be coming out with additional guidance and other things that are going to warrant changes to groundwater sustainability plans. And so by 2040 and 2042, none of those plans are going to look probably remotely close to what they look like now. For a whole variety of reasons. One is climate change is going to continually change the reliability of surface water and recharge, and that's going to need to be tracked, as well as, like I said, the depletion of interconnected surface water guidance is going to result in some changes to how they're managing the basin, as well as subsidence guidance. And then further down the line, we still are going to have to develop guidance and methodology for interbasin impacts. And this is the provision that one basin's plan can't preclude an adjoining basin from achieving their goals. So if their minimum thresholds and their operational levels are orders of magnitude off, and that's going to affect basin being able to maintain their sustainability goals, we're going to address that. And so again, that's going to cause some changes for basin implementation. But as we move into this phase, and it is important, you know, that we recognize we're sort of at the end of the beginning of the process. Now we're getting into full-blown implementation. There are going to be challenges coming up in the next few years. One is funding for agencies just to be able to carry out their program and everything. It's an issue, especially for smaller basins without the economies of scale to be able to implement, and as well as other drivers on loss of land, loss of ag land, and we're starting to see that now. PPIC, we're talking about 500,000 to 1 million acres of ag land going out in the San Joaquin Valley, and we're starting to see that. So how we and our state partners work with communities on that transition, you know, with those lands to hopefully minimize the economic and community impacts is going to be a major issue. But I think, you know, I've been saying since we were the last state to have a statewide groundwater law, but I think what we've found is just 10 years in, this act is going to work. We are going to achieve sustainability probably better than other states who tried this before us. So we are going to get there, and it's very exciting. And I think if people want to stay tuned, I know everyone's excited about Groundwater Awareness Week coming up March 11th to 15th. So stay tuned for that. We have webinars and events coming up, as well as other activities. So with that, I'll turn it over and we can begin questions, and hopefully I'll have answers for many of them.
Okay. Okay, I'm gonna start with one that sort of it's I had someone send me a list of questions, so I'm just gonna get to one of these now. Now, in Sigma, in the legislation, the GSAs, correct me if I'm wrong, the GSAs don't have to address impacts that occurred before 2015, was it?
Correct.
Yeah. Does that include, like, now that you start with interconnected surface waters, does that include interconnected surface waters that it's retroactive back to 2015 conditions?
They're not responsible for anything prior to 2015. But any impacts since then they do need to address.
Okay, interesting. Okay, that's great. Okay, let's
So
see
what some agencies have actually taken, if they do have the means to do it, not just for that, but other indicators, maintaining conditions as they were in 2015, and that, you know, kind of sets a good foundation, you know, for the future. But agencies, that there's a variety of things, but they don't have to, you know, remediate things prior to 2015.
Okay, excellent. Um, this is at the top of the Q&A. I know that you covered this in your comments before, but when is the guidance on interconnected surface water coming again?
Yeah, we're going to be coming out with a series of papers, and it's going to start. The initial one's going to be the scientific foundation of interconnected surface water and the science behind it, and that's going to probably coming out in the next few weeks. And then followed, it's going to be monitoring and modeling methodologies, and then down the line, and then it will end with sort of the guidance on SMC. So throughout all this, we're going to be engaging not just agencies, but also agency partners, NGOs, and other interests as we develop this guidance throughout the year. And we're probably going to also look to have focused discussions in different regions, because San Joaquin Valley is going to have somewhat different circumstances than, let's say, Sac Valley, that has a lot more interconnection, and then the coasts are going to have other issues. Methodology, sort of the approach and desires are going to be the same, but I think the dynamics in those areas are going to be slightly different. So expect a lot of dialogue and interest. I know there's people are really interested in getting the dialogue now, as we are, so stay tuned.
Okay, excellent. Okay, from the Q&A, how do you foresee DWR's role shifting from reviewing GSPs to enforcing actual movement towards sustainability? And what are some of the milestones you're looking to see as we move towards the 2040 deadline?
Yeah, so, you know, I'll say the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act was built upon the foundation, you know, of local control with state oversight. And that role we take real strongly. We've been really wanting to honor the local discretion, and I'll say, coming to DWR in 2021 from a local agency with 3 subbasins, became more apparent with the diversity and just issues in every basin that's so different. None of this could be managed at the statewide level. But with that being said, we are going to need to keep track on agency implementation. So again, the annual report, which is a good data set to track basin conditions, change in storage, which we're really looking at reporting out a lot more now that people are interested in recharge and how basins are improving. But really the periodic evaluation is going to be one of the main touch points. The law requires that we do a determination of a periodic evaluation. So it is a part of the plan. And so that's going to really indicate to us about, are they meeting their interim measures at their representative monitoring well locations and other indicators? And that's going to be a strong indication for us. Are they on track or not? Are there, you know, we'll be evaluating our projects being implemented that are actually advancing groundwater sustainability. And if not, you know, that could raise some issues. So I think we're going to be looking to have a lot more direct engagement with basins on these things. So there'll be a lot more direct contact and information. But again, if we do find, similar with plan reviews, that basins are not on track, it could run down to the incomplete process or have an inadequate and have state board intervention.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Okay. In reviewing adequacy of plans submitted, is DWR responding with direction to look to widen floodplain areas to provide areas for recharge and also flood safety?
No. That level of no. That level of specificity we do not provide to the agencies, because again, from a regulatory standpoint, we're giving them direct discretion on how to implement. They may have recharge projects and how they decide to take that on, whether it is floodplain restoration, which is good. We have other parts of the department promoting that and providing assistance to that. So from the oversight of the basin implementation, we're not going to get that specific, but we do have other programs and assistance we do provide for recharge, and that'll be a whole separate topic. We can talk about the work we're doing with the state board, CDFW, on streamline recharge permits and flood management. But generally we'll be looking to provide guidance. Do they have a full suite of types of projects and management actions that will lead towards sustainability? And that's primarily what we're initially looking at. Now we're going to be looking at what actions are being implemented now, and if they're not, that could raise some red flags for us.
Okay, excellent. Can you describe the relationship between SGMA and groundwater adjudications, and how do they differ? Do adjudications represent a threat to SGMA, and what actions or legislation might be needed to ensure that adjudications don't derail SGMA progress? We did have some legislation passed like a couple of years ago to help with that. So where are we at with adjudications and SGMA?
Yeah, I think there were adjudications prior to SGMA, and I'll leave those, but then there have been a number that have popped up after SGMA. And I think with those statutes that went through shortly after SGMA was passed, it was trying to, one, streamline the process and adjudications, and also navigate them in a way that complements groundwater sustainability plans, because and I am not an adjudication expert, so generally, if the adjudication is the determination of physical solution for how they're going to divide up what sustainable yield is available in the basin, in complementing what's in the plan, that could be something that could be workable within a basin if that is sort of the process that's there. Concern is if an adjudication starts to change the scientific foundation or some of the let's say sustainable yield within a plan, and you have a court-ordered adjudication and a groundwater sustainability plan in place, and they conflict with each other on those elements, that creates concern. So I think the main policy approach is to try to find a way to ensure that adjudications, if and when they do happen, are done in a way that complement plans that, let's say, are implemented and approved.
Okay, excellent.
And there was legislation enacted last year, again, modifying adjudication. So I think there's still a lot more discussion and interest on how adjudications are unfolding.
Okay, great. Okay, next question. We have seen thousands of domestic wells go dry in the last 3 years, and with continued depletion of groundwater, realistically, we will continue to see more domestic wells go dry before GSAs even adopt mitigation programs, and many GSAs will not exceed adopted MT's minimum thresholds, I think, and MOs. I'm a little lost in the acronym soup
I get
here.
it. I get.
Yeah, well,
I
these
know. I
impacts
know where they're
occur.
going.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. You know, the number, I mean, we had seen this last winter too with that unprecedented you know, snowpack, precipitation runoff. We were still January through the spring, still looking at, you know, 30 to 45 wells going dry statewide, you know, in the year, and that hasn't stopped. And you know, if you're in a well and you know your water goes off, it's an immediate issue, and it's pretty disconcerting. So again, going back to our guidance on addressing drinking water was something that we had put out, and we have seen enormous progress in how agencies are viewing you know, domestic wells and protecting that set of groundwater users. And again, this is going to be something we've been really pushing in the approval or review of plans about the adequacy of their intent to address drinking water wells. Basically, the groundwater sustainability agencies are stewards for the entire basin. And depending upon how, again, it's after 2015, how they choose to manage the basin, if it's going to result in wells going dry, you know, they could try to justify that that's not an undesirable result. But frankly, I think that would be a mountain too high to climb. So they have a responsibility for, as stewards of the basin, to ensure that, you know, all the users, including drinking water users, are not facing undesirable results. And so that's their responsibility. I think there's also, you know, drought-related impacts and really pushing coordination with the GSAs, with the county, if they have a county task force under SB 552. And, you know, really it's important linkage to bring the GSAs and the counties together on coordination of wells, as well as well permitting and land use decisions. So a lot more there. And I think there's a ways to go to ensure that, you know, human right to water is going to be something everyone has, that they have a adequate and safe, reliable drinking water supply.
Okay, great. One question while you touched on human right to water, I did get a question in about the public trust doctrine. You know, they're concerned about what regulators are doing to protect the public trust doctrine as a regulatory backstop in this era of climate change and constitutional crisis. So I'm not exactly sure. That's an awfully broad question, but how about, where does the public trust doctrine fit into SGMA?
Joe, I'm not going to get too deep into that, because then if there's attorneys on the line, and then we'll get into a cross debate. But I think generally looking at you know, habitat and the trust for natural resources, if you look at the framework of Sustainable Groundwater Management Act and the indicators, really by sustaining the basin, taking a look at impacts to all groundwater uses and users, including those affected by depletion of creeks and streams. Really what you're going to get is a full suite of protection, you know, of public trust resources. You know, so that's something that we're going to be looking through guidance and ensuring that the act is fully implemented.
Okay, great. Next question. Any high-level results you can share regarding DWR's analysis of the well permitting executive order?
Not just yet. We did that report is due to come out very soon. We're hoping it was going to come out sooner, but we did get a real good response of the survey we put out to the counties and GSAs on good, bad, and not for implementation, as well as recommendations, as well as good information from a variety of public members and other associations. Generally, I think what we found there's been, I think the awareness between the GSAs and the counties was a positive outcome of this, which was one of the important aspects, as well as that linkage of communication between the two. I think there was a lot of concern about the language and what was expected in terms of ensuring that they weren't going to impact adjoining wells. But I think on the face of it, there's some recommendations I think we're looking to develop and issue to one, address how wells are permitted in a way that keeps it ministerial and doesn't trigger CEQA, but also minimizes impacts to adjoining wells and addressing subsidence. I will say it doesn't appear from the data, and we looked at some of the empirical data during the executive order period, and well permits in subsidence areas in the Corcoran Clay seem to not slow down, which was kind of disconcerting, as well as some other data showing that what was intended in the executive order may not have been fully successful. So a lot more there. And I will say lastly that the issues around well permitting and, let's say, interference of adjoining wells and subsidence also is something that isn't just a drought circumstance. So it's something that occurs year round, and it's just something we're going to look to improve.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, next question. GSPs emphasize the vulnerability of domestic wells to lowering of groundwater levels, yet concrete help to repair or replace wells remains absent. Do you know of any GSPs that have directly addressed financial aid to domestic well owners?
Offhand, a number of the GSAs have developed well mitigation programs and have put funding mechanisms through Prop 218 developed. I don't have offhand those agencies, but they do have those. Those were something for some of the incomplete basins. We were looking for firm commitments for them to develop well mitigation programs, especially if they were having current wells going dry and some that appear they would likely go dry in the near term. So again, those are going to be things we're going to be looking at in the annual reports and particularly in the periodic evaluation to ensure that they're following through on their commitment.
Excellent. Okay. When is the next basin prioritization update scheduled? That's interesting. Do we do another basin prioritization?
Not in the near term. And I know there's a lot of interest out there for basin prioritization, but we're probably not going to pick that up for a couple years, particularly at least not till after the first periodic evaluation. I think there's been a lot of resources, time, effort, methodology to get these plans in place and implemented. And I think just the nature of basin prioritization could really upend where basins are at, depending upon where prioritization is. So we're going to look to have people at least get through their first periodic evaluation.
Okay, interesting. I didn't know there was another one coming, so learn something new every day.
Well, there isn't one. That's sort of the best answer I can give now. Is sort of like, stay tuned sometime in the future, but don't worry about it in the near term.
Okay, great. Do you have any examples of GSA supporting or requiring counties or cities to update their land development and stormwater standards to protect existing passive recharge?
I don't know.
Okay, fair enough. You mentioned grant money being tight. With the current budget problems facing California, for example, the deficit being large, what is your vision on grant availability funding for GSA projects going forward?
Yeah, well, currently there's no grant dollars left. So the last amount we issued last year, the $187 million, That was the last amount we had. I will point out that we had requests for $800 million. So it really shows the need is out there. And I think even that's a fraction of what the need
Yeah.
is out there. So I think it's real apparent for implementation that there is going to need to be additional resources. And so whether there's a water bond that comes down the line, there's probably going to be discussions as to what piece of that would be related to sustainable groundwater management implementation or recharge or other aspects. But in the meantime, local agencies, they do, many of them do have grants right now they're working under, and they have 3 years to work through those grants. But they also have fee authority, and I know that's not fun locally. But it was broad fee authority for not just administration of the agency, but also for projects and management implementation. So that's an aspect too that we're mindful of, that we do expect agencies to have the financial means to carry out their plan. But again, we're also concerned with smaller basins, with economies of scale, and the difficulty that has with let's say a small universe to be able to extract the dollars for some projects. So
Okay, well, hopefully,
Yeah.
hopefully we'll get better budget news in next year. Okay, our basin is still waiting for comments on our plan. I understand there have been staff and budget constraints, but it has been a long wait. Are you close to being caught up? This is anonymous, so I'm not sure which basin he's
yeah,
talking.
I mean, we have some alternate reviews that have come in that we're getting close to. We've also gotten some low and very low priority basins who voluntarily submitted plans. And we just actually today sent out notices that now we completed the reviews of the critically overdrafted, non-critically overdrafted. We're going to evaluate those. They're not actionable because they can't go to the board for intervention. So we're going to give a staff evaluation as guidance and recommendations to those basins. And so, later this year we'll have input to those agencies on their plan implementation, and hopefully give them good guidance on continuing on the path towards sustainability.
Okay, great. We're getting low on questions, so if you have questions, people, please put them into the Q&A box. Okay, has there been work done that provides guidance to GSAs on financing strategies to support GSA management, excuse me, and GSP implementation going forward? Are there
Yeah.
strategies that could protect users and communities and small scale farmers?
Yeah, we had a webinar last year with for GSAs on funding strategies. And we're going to be looking to get guidance for them on that. And that's going to be a real important topic on the different types of funding strategies that they can employ and other sources they can look towards. So definitely something we're going to look to support.
Okay. Here's a question that I received by email. This is related to the story about the dewatering of the Merced River. Excuse me, got something stuck in my throat. On January 18th, 2024. Let's see, it's a long question. Okay. Was that due to groundwater pumping, especially given that the water boards reported no illegal surface water withdrawals, and there has apparently been no GSP guidance to date regarding impacts to interconnected surface waters? So would you say that that's a case of overallocation and unregulated groundwater pumping?
Yeah, offhand, I don't recall that article that came out 2 weeks ago. But again, the guidance that we're going to have for interconnected surface water is going to come out this year. But we did provide, I think, fairly good guidance in our draft SMC document that came out years ago, as well as our review of plans. If you look at the staff reports and the descriptions and what's expected, we do expect and did expect that every basin plan have a real disclosure of what reaches are actually interconnected, identification of what groundwater dependent ecosystems and other species that could be impacted by depletion, some approach on monitoring networks, and some sustainable management criteria minimum thresholds. So we did, and every plan that did get approved has to have those minimums. We did caveat that they're probably not going to pass muster according to our guidance, so we're going to expect changes. So I would say it's not a blank slate, but at least the minimums are there complying with SGMA, but there's going to be a lot more refinement to that, and it is going to, as we come out, change how basins are going to manage their basins, because they're going to need to address depletion of interconnected surface waters.
And also the Merced is one of the rivers that is the focus of the State Water Board's Bay Delta Plan update. So there may be some action on increasing flows in that river when those go into effect. Okay. How will you celebrate? Oh, wait, I'm sorry. This is the top one. If you could make one or two changes to SGMA, what would they be?
Actually, one thing that was kind of amazing 10 years after the law went into place, you're taking 100 years of water law and turning it on its head with a new regulatory structure. And it was like a Rube Goldberg machine. You turn it on and wondering, how things are going to get working. And largely it has functioned and worked. There are obviously some things that aren't working great or as well, but generally we are going to get towards sustainability. I think one thing that probably was, an issue, and we've kind of seen this, it's having more than one plan in a basin, although allowed, and they have to use the same data, same methodology, has proven challenging. I think pretty much most of the inadequates, largely fell in that line. I think we've only had one or two multi-plan basins that, we've found approved. And I think those just create inherent challenges. So again, people have been able to navigate that, but I think it also creates a higher level of complexity and challenges that, could put the whole basin at risk. And it also creates a scenario where the idea is you're looking to manage on the entirety of the basin for the greater good, not within the confines of your jurisdictional boundary for your agency. You're taking on the hat of a groundwater sustainability agency for the greater good of the sustainability of the basin, and that includes those outside of your jurisdiction. And so having that mindset's also real important, and having it separated where you have your own plan sometimes can create a barrier to that view.
Okay, thank you. Okay, how will you celebrate SGMA at 10 years? What is most exciting to you about the next 5 years? We'll have a big party.
Yeah, I think a party's in store. So again, I think Groundwater Awareness Week will be won't be our Mardi Gras week, but it'll be time to get together and celebrate. And I think we are going to plan different things throughout the year to celebrate. And I think it's collectively everyone here and those who aren't here in various basins, whether GSAs or public and others who participated, all should join together and celebrate. It's a good time to keep the momentum going. I think the next 3 to 5 years, as I said, are going to be critically important, but also challenging. I think we're seeing as implementations really taking root, those are going to be very difficult decisions in a lot of basins. If you're dealing with allocations, you're dealing with land that can't be supported any longer because there's not going to be the means to be able to supply groundwater to them. How communities are going to transition those lands out of agriculture to other lands that could be a benefit to the community and also some economic and job opportunities are going to be enormously challenging. So I think the next 3 to 5 years is going to be maybe in some areas stormy as we get through the first periodic evaluation and get a lot of these actions lined up. And for a lot of basins, given the magnitude of the overdraft, pretty significant steps are going to need to be taken and have been taken to date. So again, I think as people brought up, interconnected surface water, subsidence, interbasin impacts, those things are going to drive changes to the sustainable management criteria that is going to need to advance either more recharge or more demand reduction. So as difficult as it is where agencies landed with their current SMC is probably the start, and it's probably going to need to get ratcheted down even further as we get into implementation. So I always leave people with sort of a downer talk. So
Yeah. Okay, well, I asked for questions and I have a bunch here, and we have about 13 minutes left, it looks like. So if y'all will go in and upvote the questions you want, I want to make sure I get the most, the ones you all are most collectively interested in. Okay, the 2015 cutoff makes the assumption that groundwater conditions in 2015 were sufficient to protect interconnected surface water. Protect the public trust and support endangered species. This is a demonstratively false assumption. Will the groundwater dependent ecosystem guidance set threshold based on meeting a degraded 2015 condition, or actually target conditions that which provide for restoration of those ecosystems?
long, complicated question. I think if I'm tracking the gist is, I think this is the 2015 question.
Yeah,
Reading it the same way.
cutoff,
And
yeah.
yeah, I mean, the statute, clearly laid out that impacts prior to 2015 are not, responsible for GSAs to implement. They could voluntarily do that. So, that's something is in the law, and
Yeah.
we can't change that. But again, I think looking at depletion of interconnected surface water and groundwater dependent ecosystems and other other species that are dependent upon creeks and streams, similar to water quality and some other aspects. There are other agencies, State Board, Fish and Wildlife, others that have standards and regulatory standards that are being implemented or have been implemented in the agency. We're going to expect the GSAs to work collaboratively with those other agencies as they start to develop their SMC for depletion of interconnected surface water. And we did message that out in a number of basins where those things were in place. So again, they're not developing regulations for species protection, but they do need to take those into account and ensure that what species are there, they're not going to have undesirable results from depletion of interconnected surface water.
Right, that the 2015 is a legislative thing, so
Right.
yeah. Okay, next question. Have surface water irrigation water districts with established political power in northern Sacramento Valley dominated the local control of GSAs? I believe this is a question addressing the Tuscan Water District. I don't know if you want to weigh in on this or not, but up here in Chico, where I live now, this has been a big thing in our town.
Yeah. So agency, and I'll talk generally about GSAs, and if you're in Chico and Butte County, being a neighbor of mine, howdy neighbor. There is a variety. There's municipalities, counties are playing a big role, which is important. I used to work for Butte County. So that mix of local agencies is important. And I think generally we've seen the wide gambit of how eligible local agencies form GSAs and how they organize themselves within basins. And it, again, ran the gambit where there's upwards of 13 independent GSAs, and some have one and some have a mix, versus irrigation districts, counties, and that. So again, the political makeup, we've heard this from a number of constituents about feeling cut out, not listened to. So public engagement and stakeholder engagement is, again, another thing that we are going to continue to press and push and try to advance, because really none of this is going to work well if the public is not engaged and they don't have a voice or a strong voice in participation. And I think we've seen really basins that have had challenges. It's because of in some ways lack of full engagement from the entire community. Again, it was really intended when SGMA went in a higher bar for local agencies on engagement. Now, we've heard too, some structures of different agencies may have a certain view or perspective as to what they think about the act, or how they view what their business is. And so again, with local discretion, we can't go in and dictate how agencies form if they're in compliance with the law, but we can direct and on their conduct, and their conduct and expectations under the act is going to be consistent, irregardless of how they're formed. That's sort of the approach we're taking.
Okay. Why have many measurable objectives set at or below historic groundwater low levels instead of aiming for improvements that would benefit the public trust?
Again, that was allowed under the law. It was allowed that agencies could do, especially if they were in steep decline, continue that decline with some leveling off. And again, there's a trade-off to that depending upon how long that glide path goes and where they level off and where they set their minimum thresholds. Is going to be a trade-off about what undesirable results are going to occur for all the groundwater uses and users, which in the case of drinking water or others that they may need to do some mitigation or some response to avoid those undesirable results. And again, as interconnected surface water guidance comes out, and they start measuring and monitoring, and according to consistent standards, we're going to develop, or at least guidance on options on how to take that on, is going to inevitably change what those minimum thresholds and measurable objectives are. So expect changes to what's on the books right now for all the plans.
Okay. Oh, here's an interesting question. What are some of the legal aquifer ownership consequences of artificial recharge?
Another legal question from a non-lawyer. So this has come up also with concern about how banks are used and how recharge is used, because and I'll talk about recharge, and there's been a lot of groundwater recharge streamlined permits through the state board. And when you go get a permit to do recharge, you're getting a water right. And that has you need to specify what your intended uses are for that, and the place of use. And that all goes through a state board permitting process that's publicly noticed. And inevitably, most of the recharge permits are issued to districts or GSAs, and they're doing that to replenish the basin for bringing up basin conditions for avoiding undesirable results. And this is a major piece to address overdraft, which is pretty considerable in some basins. Now, others, I think people were also concerned if people were using recharge or storing surface water for the purpose of then taking it out and using it for other purposes different than benefiting the basin. Those activities, presuming if the board allows it, could occur, but they may not improve basin conditions or move towards sustainability. So if that occurs and those activities are going on and basin conditions are not changing, that may run into an issue we may have with basin implementation that could raise questions about whether they're going to be incomplete or subject to state board intervention. Similarly, with banks, typically what it is stored surface water that someone has an existing surface water right. They're basically parking it in the basin, almost like a reservoir, and then taking it out. Again, that is different water going in, coming out, doesn't change basin conditions, the native water, so it doesn't improve groundwater sustainability. So that would not be a viable opportunity to improve basin conditions if the water was not left behind.
Okay, excellent, thank you. Okay, does the state or DWR expect to increase groundwater quality and quantity monitoring in the near term? I think this is more in the realm of the State Water Board, which runs the GAMA program for water quality. But
yeah, I think they're getting at the water quality indicator in the plans. So there have been, depending upon the constituents of concern in a particular basin, depending, we've also pointed out in some plans they didn't address all of the constituents of concerns, and we pointed to the state board put together a nice tool for agencies to look up what constituents of concern are in their basin. So we're expecting them to look at that tool and others to ensure that they have a good understanding as to what constituents of concern in their basin, really understanding what the water quality aspects are of that, especially if they're going to start lowering basins below historic lows. We've told them that raises a higher bar for them to, in some cases, get involved in increased monitoring, because again, they have responsibility if they are taking the basin lower than historic lows, it could exacerbate existing plumes, and they need responsibility to track that and coordinate and work much closely with the water quality agencies in those basins.
Okay, great. Well, it looks like we are just about to our end. I will give you this one last question here. Is there means within the legislation to actually take corrective action on groundwater overusers, those who choose to ignore the GSA, what is set forth in a basin plan and continue overpumping?
Yeah, the GSAs have enforcement authority besides fee authority, and they have tools to enact laws, orders, resolutions, regulations, the whole bit. But they also have enforcement authority, and they can impose penalties and fines, as well as requiring monitoring and other aspects. So the groundwater sustainability agencies have enormous powers that they can employ to carry out the act.
Okay, excellent. Well, we're at the end of our time, so I want to thank you, Paul, for coming in and being willing to answer our questions. For folks coming up, we're working on putting together a webinar on interconnected surface waters. That's myself and Civic Well. And we have Anacita Augustinus coming in for office hours in March, and more sessions in the works. So please sign up. You'll get a link in the follow-up email where you can sign up to be notified of those events. And thank you again for coming in, Paul, and answering our questions. It's been a pleasure.
Anytime. Thank you all.
Good afternoon, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye.